exports are the lifeblood of the sector regionally and nationally, and include over 150,000 jobs within the province itself. So welcome to you all, and thank you for being part of our breakaway session on promoting automotive exports from the Eastern Cape, looking at the challenges and the opportunities and suggestions on how we can solve those. Our panel today, if you'd allow me to introduce him, Mr. Andreas Brandt, who is the CEO of MBSA and Executive Director of Manufacturing, Dr. Paulo Fernandes, who is the CEO of Automotive Industry Holdings, Mr. Ndu Chala, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Narcam, and Mr. Michael Mabasa, who is CEO of NAMSA. You can give them a round of applause. My name is Guy Rich, and I'm going to be your panel facilitator for this session. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to facilitate this session. Thank you, gentlemen. Ladies and gents, before we start, cell phones, please, if you can switch them off or put them on silent, that would be appreciated. We don't want to be interrupted. So the process to be followed for the panel discussion is that I will give a brief overview and a brief context of the automotive sector in the Eastern Cape, and I'm then going to allow the panelists to just say some opening remarks, after which I'm going to direct specific strategic questions to them and ask them to respond. Once they've responded individually, their fellow panelists will be able to comment on what they've said and provide feedback from that perspective as well. So panelists, you're free to comment on anything that your fellow panelists say. The aim of the panel discussion, as we've said, is to explore the challenges, the opportunities, and the suggestions on how to solve current challenges, both, or particularly, that would be the role of both national and provincial governments as well. And ultimately what we want to find, or what we want to get to, is for manufacturers and component manufacturers to be able to position themselves to not only to continue to contribute to the Eastern Cape economy, but also to grow within the space and position the Eastern Cape as a major manufacturing hub. Depending on the time, we've been told to be finished by 11:45, so that we can move back to the plenary for the plenary report backs. Yes. 11:45 or 1:45, sorry. My mistake, yes. Well picked up there, well picked up there. So depending on the time that we've set aside for the questions, there may be an opportunity for audience engagement as well. So we'll come to that as well. So just in order to provide the context, the province is fortunate enough to have a well-developed stock of auto sector related support resources. And these include the Cook Industrial Development Zone, the East London Industrial Development Zone. We've got 3 harbours in the province, and we also have auto supplier parks that are underpinned by a range of institutional support structures and mechanisms for the sector from both provincial and national government. A 2012 study by Kambale Kavase into the East Cape automotive sector showed that there are risks and benefits associated with the province automotive sector being driven by more than half by the foreign market itself. According to a study, export-output ratio improved more than tenfold between 1995 and 2010. The issue around that is that certain things have changed. So we're talking 14 years ago. Back then it was fine. We now have different aspects and we now have different issues that we need to look at. Changing global conditions, a focus on environmental sustainability, a move away from combustion engines to electric and hybrid vehicles, challenges in auto mobility in urban areas, and increasing competition in the auto sector present a dynamic context in which the auto sector operates on a day-to-day basis. Research also shows that there are challenges in terms of the contribution of the sector based on its ability to influence what's happening around it, underdeveloped tooling industry, energy costs and energy availability, as we're all aware, competitiveness, limited local research and development capabilities, distance to market, supply markets and logistics. Threats to the sector include an increasing and emerging issue around Asian manufacturing. So this provides the context and the background, ladies and gentlemen. So it's good and it's bad. And we're hoping that we'll be able to, or our panelists will be able to address some of these issues and help us understand from their context and their perspective what needs to be done and how we can do it better moving into the future. So I'm going to start off and ask our panelists one by one, and I'm going to start off with the CEO of MBSA, Andreas, if he can comment first and provide some opening remarks, followed by Paolo, Ndu, and Makla.
If you, can you hear me? Do I need that?
Hello, testing. This one's better.
It's better?
That one's better.
At least people are listening. So if you look at the legacy of MBSA, Mercedes-Benz South Africa, we are talking about 66 years of manufacturing excellence, 66 years. So be assured that in those 66 years, there were ups and downs, challenges and awards. And this is what this company is all about. We take up the challenge and we are proud to what we have achieved. And we will keep doing that. If you look at it a little bit deeper, we are very much export driven while we are operating in the country as a brand. I think we had the discussion earlier today. So we do both. We do operations here and we do have marketing and sales of and after sales of our products. On these two legs, MBSA Limited is operating within 66 years of manufacturing excellence and even before that as an importer. We are only successful because of our steadily increasing supplier footprint, that we are working closely together with our partners, and we've been also doing that for decades now. Coming back, the potential of this company is definitely driven by the exports. So without further ado, I would like to leave it like that. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, and thank you all for attending the session, and thank you for the invitation to present here. I think those of you who have been in the automotive industry for some time will recall that about a decade ago, if you participated in a session such as this, there were two statements made about the automotive industry that were taken as the truth. The one statement was that there would be a massive consolidation of the automotive industry globally into a few very large companies. And the second statement was that we would never have a new OEM in South Africa. Of course, 10 years later, neither of those statements are true. Whilst there has been some consolidation, you see the likes of Stellantis taking over other previous car companies, there's also been a massive proliferation of companies that are not household names, that most of us did not know, still do not know, and there's a huge number of smaller companies. And of course, we do have two new OEMs in the country, and incidentally, both in the province as well. I think the 10 years that have passed have seen massive changes in the automotive industry, certainly the biggest since I started working in the sector. And these have been driven by things, some well-known, others perhaps less known. So the introduction of electric vehicles and new energy vehicles has really scrambled a lot of the previous truths. If you look at South Africa, the market strength of cars and vehicles made in the East, particularly in China, Korea, India, the market penetration, the percentage market share of many of these vehicles is such that the possibility, the probability of local assembly, local manufacture starts becoming a reality. We've already seen that in the case of Mahindra, where they assemble in Durban. We've seen increased model diversification, shorter model runs, increased flexibility, all of which have necessitated different models of assembly. And we see things like contract assembly, we see things like sharing of infrastructure, both of which are taking place in South Africa. To a smaller degree, the modification of vehicles, particularly in the pickup market, something that we've seen with the Nissan, with Ford, with Toyota. Just as an example there, we have a facility in Silverton that provides Ford with components on a just-in-time, just-in-sequence base. One of the components is an optional, a modification. When we started production, that modification went into about 15% of the production, Today it's going into 80% of the production, a huge increase. So modification centers are becoming reality. There's also the deglobalization, particularly post-COVID, and associated with the deglobalization is this need or apparent need to reduce the reliance on China and favoring more friendly manufacturing environments. The question is South Africa a more friendly manufacturing environment? All of these are changes that have happened in the last 10 years. These changes have created complexity, they've created some confusion, but I think in the midst of that, there's also some opportunity for South Africa. Let me leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Guy. Greetings to the colleagues and my colleagues who I have on stage here. I am the COO of NACAM, which is the Component Manufacturers Industry Association. We hold that, and I think Andreas mentioned it earlier to say we are partners in this automotive space. 150 strong members, of which 40% are sitting in the Eastern Cape region. I think automotive, we find ourselves in a, do I say, a bittersweet type of a period in that we've come a long way and we were impacted by a lot of issues from 2019, COVID, semiconductor issues. And I think Andreas makes an important point to say a lot of the focus for some of the OEMs are focused in terms of exports. And with what's happening globally, you start to then have impact on the demand and what happens in the local industry from that perspective. We also find ourselves in a difficult situation because of that, in that lowering of volumes from, let's say, the OEMs, then impact the supplier or the component guys. And that's where I think I want to start it off to say the 40% that's sitting in the Eastern Cape is heavily reliant on the four, or let me say the three OEMs which are based here. And as you would also know, that as components, we take lead from OEMs. So whatever that happens from that perspective then has a residual impact or a ripple impact into the components. But we'll delve into some of the issues I think you touched on when it comes to port, when it comes to electricity, and all of that stability that is required for us to maintain that contribution of GDP of around 5 to 6% into the country's economy.
Thank you very much, Guy. And I think it's 2 minutes before noon, so I can still say good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good to be here. So I think from the NAMSA point of view, I wanted obviously to start on a positive, that we are very proud that as a South African automotive industry, we're celebrating a centenary this year of automotive manufacturing in this country. And I think, as Andreas said, MBSA is celebrating 66 of that 100 years. BMW is celebrating 51. Toyota has been here since 1966. I can go on and on. So we are very, very proud that we've got a very rich heritage of auto manufacturing in our country, and we should absolutely be very, very proud of it. And secondly, as a country, we also have a very solid industrial policy that supports the automotive industry. I'm sure many of you are aware of the MIDP, which was started and introduced in 1995, which subsequently became APDP, and then subsequently APDP2, which is currently the version that we are using, which is really the incentive program that supports our industry to be as robust and also as compelling as it is in this particular current time. You are aware that South Africa currently is definitely an export-led market in terms of both the vehicles, fully built units, and also our components. We are currently exporting 66% of all the vehicles that we are producing on average in the country. Of course, there are those OEMs that are exporting a lot more. than that particular average, but 66.5% is the average amongst the 7 local manufacturing OEMs that we have in the country. Between 1995 and the end of last year, we exported more than 6 million vehicles out of South Africa into 150 different markets around the world. This for us is really a strong vote of confidence because in a small market where we are accounting for less than 1% of global production, the fact that we've got 150 different markets around the world where we are actually sending our vehicles, it's really an indication that international markets do see South Africa as a very attractive destination where we are able to build very, very strong vehicles that can be able to attract these particular markets. I'm sure also many of you would recall that when we started with our APDP program in 1995, South Africa was producing around 42 different brands in South Africa. We had to then narrow those down to 11. Currently, we're producing 11 brands because our business is really about the economies of scale. So it doesn't, help to produce too many brands, but export or produce less for consumption both in South Africa and also in these international markets. So we had to make some very difficult choices to a point where we rationalize these brands so that we can really be able to make sure that we are able to produce at scale and also be able to make sure that we are able to be globally competitive as much as possible. We are obviously very proud also as a country that we have been absolutely robust in contributing quite very significantly to the development of world-class policies that supports our industry. And I think the South African government has been absolutely very active, at least up until 5 years ago, in relation to supporting the industry in making sure that we are able to accelerate the work that we need to be able to do going forward. So our exports as South Africa are fundamentally important, and we need to be able to continue to push those exports as hard as possible and make sure that our infrastructure is also able to support all our initiatives in this particular regard. Gad, I'll pause there for now.
Thanks, Michael. So let's get to the crux of the matter, ladies and gents. And Andreas, I'm going to direct this one to you. What would MBSA, as a major manufacturer in the province, what would MBSA like to see put in place in order to address the challenges, but also take advantage of the opportunities in the sector, specifically around the promotion of exports?
Thank you, Guy. I would like to get you into a picture, and then every contributor can derive his or own contribution to it. Let's start how we are perceived. We are acting on the southern tip of the African continent. We are exporting to 80 countries. So let me answer in 2 facets. First one, an operational facet. We are driven by quality, not negotiable for Mercedes and probably for most of my colleagues. And that includes the quality from us and the quality of our suppliers. And the best thing is if the customer says this is the best car I've ever had. The second one is on-time delivery. On-time delivery is that the customer is not waiting for the car, but he gets it on time or maybe a little earlier than we tell him. That also implicitly means that we have to get our parts here in time. So we call it the inbound supply chain, and this is the first point where stakeholders can derive their own contribution from. So we need a reliable supply chain on the inbound side. Same on the outbound, and that probably includes our suppliers in the material that they are receiving. That is one of the topics operationally where we definitely need all hands on deck. The third aspect is cost position. If my cars are more expensive than the same car from a different location, I'm out of the game. So we must be absolutely straightforward that costs and a competitive cost position is one of the operational levers that we have to use. let's pause on the operational side. Let's move on to the strategic side of things. Strategically, we really appreciate what this country went through in terms of the elections and the stability of government. There were in headquarters different concerns by saying, does South Africa stay stable? And this country proved that we are stable. First thing that headquarter really appreciates on a strategic level. Okay, do you invest in an unstable environment? Probably not. Are we stable? Yes, so it's not an excuse. The second one is what Mike was also referring to, the APDP framework. That is, as far as I remember, solid till 2030 and has another 5 years to 2035 as an outlook. That is absolutely vital for headquarters to make decisions, to have a proper, defined, robust framework. And the third one is open trade. Open trade. So if I'm getting a car to the US, I would strongly recommend that we put all our hands on deck to get that angle to the US very robust. That's where we're coming from. I'm fully agreeing with Michael. We have to point out the positive things, but we have some work to do. And the other element is we have trade boundaries. It's the negative side of things. The positive side is with AGOA, we have a positive momentum. We also have countries where we are struggling because we are exporting from South Africa. So those countries need a strong stakeholder engagement from our partners to get those boundaries reduced. So with that said, operationally and strategically, every contributor, every stakeholder, including ourselves and our suppliers, know what we have to do. And there are the Olympic rings, if you are a little bit creative, on the wall. And take it sportif, okay? There is a sports team who did not lose one single game last year, not a single game. And the coach said the other day, the only two things that you can derive out of the past is skill and confidence. Everything else is the game of the day. So you have to score on that day. And I think that's what makes a champions team, and I believe that we are a champions team. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Andreas. Panelists, anyone want to take a bite? Do? Mikhail? Paula? Okay, super. So remember, as I said earlier on, you can comment on anything that your fellow panelists have said. So I'm going to move across to Mr. Chala from NACAM. Now, NACAM, for those of you that don't know, represents over 150 manufacturing brands with 80% manufacturing members supplying OEMs. As per the Automotive Export Manual of 2023, NACAM's total component manufacturing employment is estimated at around 83,000 people. So it's arguably the most important association in the sector. How do you see the challenges facing the Eastern Cape auto sector being addressed?
Thanks, Guy. I think we've mentioned the first few points of some of the challenges that are faced by the local component manufacturers, and particularly in the Eastern Cape. And I won't delve into the electricity challenges. I won't delve into port challenges. But I want to probably focus on probably two things, in the sense that localization for us, if we want to keep a thriving automotive sector in South Africa, that piece for us is something that is very critical for us to maintain. And when we look at the automotive master plan, we had targets of saying by 2035 we'll be at 60% of local content. Currently, I think we are still hovering around the 39.5% worth of localization. And if we were to look at that gradually, we probably should have increased, because I think we started off on the same pace, which was about 36, 37% initially when the automotive master plan was developed. So we should be around a 44, 45% mark currently. And there are myriad effects of what that does to the component base. As you rightfully say, 88,000 employees strong in the industry, and with lowering volumes that we're starting to see, that has, again, I mentioned earlier, the ripple effect of saying you would then find that it is therefore uncompetitive to maintain all of these component manufacturers unless there is an active drive to improve that localization content, and we can then see the investment into the sector back in again. Over the last, I think the sixth administration, component manufacturers, I think, on aggregated numbers, contributed more than 20 billion rand, so if you look at that 5-year period. And that's on the back of saying there is volumes that will come from, let's say, in general, all of the OEMs. As I said, we are guided by what happens from an OEM perspective. So when we invest based on an investment opportunity that has been announced. And again, because we are an export-led, as Andreas and Mike covered earlier, what you then find is that we are not sitting at those announced figures from a production element, and that has impact on loading balance sheets for component manufacturers who are taking up the opportunity. So in moving forward, I think, and as an argument point that probably we need to look at, and how do we drive that localization drive as a sector together, I think, as component manufacturers and OEMs, NAMSA, included as the industry association for the OEMs. I think that should be the drive in this particular administration period. APDP is a stable, or APDP2, Mike is quite correct to say, is a stable policy for us in autos. I think that's the piece that we're lacking for us to be able to drive that, and the impact of that 40% of companies, which I referred to earlier. Eastern Cape should be, or is, let me put it probably in that way, a great investment destination, in the fact that there are 3 ports in the province. And as I said, so we've got 3 OEMs, 4 if we still include the Ford engine plant. We've got more OEMs looking at the opportunity to still come into the Eastern Cape. If we can maintain that and try to drive, we will then ensure that there are component guys who can support effectively. Second part, which I won't dwell on, is the skill part of it. I think if we are able to maintain the OEMs and the growth of that and the diversification that of OEMs, as Mike, I think, alluded to earlier on, and the skill, keeping it in the Eastern Cape, would not be a challenge. At the moment, I think because of the reducing of volumes, you find that keeping skill in the Eastern Cape is also a problem. And how do you then maintain all of those things and a thriving sector from an autos perspective if you can't balance the two? So for me, I think very high level to probably address, as I said, we've covered the others, but that piece for us of ensuring that OEM volumes are stable, it then creates a stable component sector. And also to say we drive that localization piece would for us make sense, and we will see that we will have a thriving autos from a components perspective in support of OEMs which are in the province.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. I wanted to perhaps maybe come in on the localization question that Ndu has referenced. And our view as NAMSA, and I think as OEM, and I know that Andres would firmly agree, is that as a country, we're actually sleeping on a job, because there are fantastic opportunities that are beginning to emerge. If you take, for an example, the future of this industry as the automotive industry, we are now talking about the electrification of our vehicles. We're talking about new energy vehicles. If you look at the continent of Africa, we've got about 10 minerals in this continent that are mission critical in the manufacturing of the battery technology. In South Africa alone, we've got about 6 of those 10 minerals that we need. And what we are doing currently as a country is that we are mining these minerals at our backyard. We put them into containers, and then we ship them to China. And those minerals are beneficiated there, and those finished products come back into the country as finished products, and we end up paying top dollar for those. And our capacity to be able to find opportunities for localization where we can truly be able to create a new economy as a country, so that we can really be able to make sure that we are able to accelerate. I mean, I was looking at the jobs numbers that were released recently, where those job numbers are actually going the wrong way, where unemployment in the country is actually even persisting, and it's even worse than it was 12 months ago. So I think we need to be able to think differently as a country in order for us to really be able to make sure that we are able to move to a different place. We're doing a lot of work now with the mining industry. We've already identified, I mean, those minerals, for an example, we know we need bauxite. We know bauxite is available in Guinea. We need copper, which is available here in South Africa, in Zambia, in the DRC. Cobalt, which is also available in South Africa, in Madagascar, and also in the DRC. Graphite, Mozambique, Tanzania, and also in Madagascar. Iron ore, we've got that in abundance here in South Africa. Lithium in Zimbabwe. Manganese, if you go to our ports here, we've got tons and tons of manganese that we cannot, move to China. Why should we be moving that manganese to China if we can be able to beneficiate that into in South Africa, so that we are able to move from what we call pit to pot to pit to plant, so that next to these mining houses that we have, what Mdu has indicated, we can be able to create sustainable beneficiation projects, not just only to supply to MBSA and the other local OEMs, but also for our export market. If you look at, for an example, last year, our exports in terms of the component manufacturers, our export value that was brought into the country declined significantly because South Africa is no longer able to export catalytic converters at the same rate at which we used to do in the past, because of this evolution of new energy vehicles. So we have absolutely an opportunity to really create a fantastic economy that can be able to employ young people and be able to make sure that we become a center of attraction in the continent.
Thanks very much, Michael. I'm going to go off script here a little bit, and I want to follow up on what you've just said, and I'd like our panelists to answer this as well. Is the question now becomes, who takes the lead on that, and how? Who wants to take a bite?
Yeah, so I think we absolutely need policy. So I think government needs to take the lead, create a very solid, stable policy that is going to help us to be able to know what are the do's and don'ts. Companies like MBSA and all our OEMs, they are ready to play. They are ready to come into this particular space so that they can be able to also put investments on the table. I mean, I remember the first time I met Andreas some 3 years ago, one of the key questions that he always asked at the NAMSA table is battery manufacturing. What can we do together to be able to create the necessary economies of scale as a country in this particular space to help us to drive these conversations? I mean, if you look at countries like Morocco, you look at Egypt in Africa, those countries are not, they're going to eat our lunch. There's no doubt about it, because they have seen an opportunity and they are now creating, those particular gaps in order for them to be able to play a lot faster and a lot aggressively than what we are doing. If you look at vehicle manufacturing 5 years ago, South Africa used to be accounting for about 76% of all vehicles that are produced in the continent. Last year, in 2023, we account only for 54% of what is produced by Africa, because other markets in the continent have really taken up this particular opportunity, because they see an opportunity, and Africa as a continent is also a virgin territory that can really help us to be able to grow the automotive industry.
Paulo?
Guy, I'd like to, in a way, add to what Mikael is saying. I mean, Mikael has been using the example of the electric battery and the fact that we have so many of the minerals, etc. But that argument exists even today without the electric battery. You know, we have so many minerals that go into the vehicle. Those of us who follow the news will seen maybe, 3-4 months ago, there was the danger that AMSA, ArcelorMittal, was closing, and there would be an entire opportunity that would be lost. So I think as much as the opportunity exists with these new electric vehicles, electric batteries, the opportunity exists today with the vehicles that we have. And I think what we need is probably a government approach that focuses on not only the mineral beneficiation and the localization, but also balances that with competitiveness. Because Andreas pointed out that we need to be competitive. We need to be cost competitive. And I think that's where the focus is. You know, localization at all costs is a little bit like nationalism. We must remain competitive. And I think that's the real challenge. But I do think that there's work to be done in that area. Yes, let's capitalize on the mineral endowment that we have. Let's capitalize on the localization. But let's do that on a competitive basis rather than a protective basis.
I guess it's probably nuances of views of differentiation. Fully support to say, I think at the moment, we would want government to be very strong in terms of policy going forward for that and to take the lead when it comes to that. And I think there's this misconception that you always hear to say NEVs or electric vehicles, we are not ready, or whatever the case may be from a South African standpoint. And I think once there is stable and confirmed policy, it's always easy to then, I mean, I think and I speak from a component and I'd say from an OEM perspective, once we have that surety and confirmation, it's always easy to invest to then, you know, put in play whatever shifts that need to happen. But I think to balance the competitive space, agreed in the sense, but there still needs to be that level of protection that we do have in the country. We cannot shy away from the fact that I think it was in your earlier comments, Guy, to say we are being swallowed up by Asian companies in the country. And we need protective mechanism from government that will assist us to be that competitive so that we can be able. So as I say, so there are different nuances in how you look at it to say we have to be competitive from that scale, but we also need some level of protection as local manufacturers for us to be able to stay competitive, and there needs to be a balance of that for I think the growth in the sector of automotive.
So having said that, I want to explore this a little bit more because I think it's an important aspect, is that looking at the export market, how does the Eastern Cape compare in terms of competitiveness? And maybe, Andreas, I'm gonna direct that to you. We're not a major player. We know that we're not a major player. But how competitive are we, number one? And number two, what can we do better?
You leave some quite tough questions. And the person who has that entire answer is probably very rich or famous. Or let me try with my limited intelligence, okay? We are competitive in terms of a unit price, yes, because of APDP, because that usually offsets our location, okay? So with that said, we can literally offset that we are on the tip of Africa. The localization of our suppliers, so the broadening of our local content, helps if it is a financial viable setting. So this is not something that we can throw in the morning like dice and say, if it's a 6, we localize, and if it's a 3, we don't. This is a pure business case behind that. And it's driven, and I'm fully with you, it's driven by volume, it's also driven by the complexity of what we are industrializing, and it's also driven by the technology that the product is requiring. I'll make an example. A battery is a very complex one. A wiring harness is something that is probably and on the other side of things, I'm not saying it's a, I just try to pick two examples. So also the technology must be there. But it's all coming back to the unit price that I have to put forward to headquarters by saying, am I better in terms of cost position than competing plants? But again, APDP helps us to offset the location and the excess or the increased supply chain costs. But besides that, we need proper infrastructure costs. Water, electricity, it's not only the price, but also the reliability of those, which also comes with an indirect price if we don't have it. And the third one is also let's say, the infrastructure element of harbor performance and price is definitely crucial for us to perform in a global competition. And I can tell you, at the end of the day, it comes back to quality, on-time delivery, and cost position. So it's not only cost, it's all the three of them.
Maybe if I can try and put a little bit of a positive slant on your question. When you asked the question, my immediate thought was competitive in terms of the rest of South Africa or competitive in terms of the world. And quite clearly, the bottom line is must be competitive in terms of the rest of the world. I mean, that's what makes the difference. But let's pause for a moment on that and say, I mentioned in my opening comments that we've had two new OEMs, obviously Bike and Stellantis coming in. And although I'm not quite sure of the Bike position, let's look at the Stellantis, or let's look at them both. Interestingly, they both came into the Eastern Cape. They both came into existing auto hubs that have a history of automotive industry. They have staff that have worked in automotive industry. They have the human resources. They have the supplier base. They have a long value chain that can contribute into their operations. They both came into IDZs. Now, that's, the IDZs in a way is a tool of government. So government does play its role. It provides the infrastructure that Andreas was talking about. It provides probably world-class infrastructure, etc. They're both coastal, which is important, but particularly given the sort of logistics element to it. Having said that, there's still a massive challenge with the logistics, a massive challenge with rail, massive challenge with port. The new changes at Transnet, the apparent openness to private sector participation, both in port operations as well as rail, is promising, but a long way to go still. From a positive slant, one would need to look at what attracted Stellantis. We would need to understand that. And we need to capitalize on that to say, how do we make this an attractive environment for more investment, for more exporters? There are examples in the country that one can learn from, and these need to be properly analyzed. And those things that were weaknesses, I would assume all of those that we mentioned before, electricity supply, reliability and cost, logistics supply, logistics reliability, all of those, that's where we should be putting our focus on addressing that so that we can make a much better value proposition for the next investor.
Okay, all sorted. Super, thanks for that, Paolo. I think that brings me to my next question, which is to say that the Eastern Cape remains an attractive investment destination, especially with the IDZs. Once again, the East London IDZ, the majority of investors and the majority of manufacturers in there are aligned to the auto sector. As you quite rightly mentioned, the Kucha IDZ has recently secured two auto manufacturers to locate in there. So that would then hypothesize that there are more opportunities than there are threats, and that we can expect and I say a boom in inverted commas. Would we be correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I think it's a very correct assumption because we do know, I think from a NAMSA point of view, we can confirm that there are two additional OEMs that are currently doing their environmental studies to come into South Africa. We are obviously not able to, to disclose who they are because we've signed non-disclosure agreements and also to support them to finalize their environmental studies and other work that they are doing. So the Eastern Cape is definitely, an attractive destination for the automotive industry. And I think its location next to the hub, and we've got three, harbors in this, province that we can maximize to be able to make sure that we are able to create a compelling business case for this particular province. The challenge obviously that Gauteng, which is the second biggest manufacturer, and I need to indicate obviously that from a manufacturing point of view, in fact, the Eastern Cape is the biggest manufacturing hub of South Africa. I think more than 48% of vehicles that we're producing in South Africa are produced from this particular province. And the fact that you have bike and also Stellantis coming through in the next 24 months or so, we are likely to see even a much bigger increase. And with that said, the challenge that obviously we have currently with the Gauteng location is the logistics, because the operational costs to run a hub, for example, out of Silverton. If you take, for example, the Ford Ranger that we are producing in Silverton by Ford, and their estimates currently is around 200,000 units per annum. And the majority of those units are also going out of the country as exports. And currently, those vehicles are pushed out of Silverton to Durban via roads, which is a massive, massive cost for Ford. The rail network between Gauteng and Durban, and also the South Corridor from Gauteng to the Eastern Cape, those two are not fully functional. And I think we need to be able to reinvest very, very quickly in order to be able to get those up and running as quickly as possible. But in the absence of those, I mean, if you take, for example, the location of Mercedes-Benz, which is just next to the port, Andreas is not sitting with the same challenges of moving those vehicles on the roads, except obviously when he brings them up to Gauteng for the local market. But for his export business, obviously the port is just next door, and he's able to move those. So I think those are the challenges that we currently have. But certainly the Eastern Cape is a very, very attractive destination for many of the OEMs that are coming into the country, and we are hopeful that we can be able to strengthen our value proposition as a province to be able to make sure that we are able to attract even more.
Thanks, Guy. I think I can fully support Mike on that. I mean, if you look at the two, as you said, provinces, Gauteng, and then you consider also, I think, KZN also has two ports, but doesn't have, let's say, the institutional and support of the industry that I think Eastern Cape has. I mean, with East London IDZ, Kucha, you've also got your AIDC, Eastern Cape, which are great institutions that support, I think, the automotive space. So I think that also garners, I think, the support for industry and makes it more attractive. The IDZs, the tax incentives that you'll find on the rental that you also find, and I think does support that. And I think if you compare the three major hubs in the country for autos, Eastern Cape is actually much more attractive if you were to compare to others.
So what's coming out clearly is that government has a very central role to play in terms of promoting exports and making use of the opportunities available, but as well as addressing the challenges moving forward. So the Eastern Cape Provincial Industrial Development Strategy emphasizes the fact that provincial government needs to play a central coordinating role in ensuring an enabling environment is created. So Paolo, maybe I'm going to address this to you because you were previously with the AIDC in the province and you know the province well. So the question is, how well is government playing, or provincial government playing, the central coordinating role? Maybe at provincial and national level. We've heard some aspects around
So I left the AIDC in 2008, so I'm probably a little bit outdated. But let me say this. I think there are laudable efforts by every level of government to try and attract, maintain, support the industry. Whether it is the provincial agency like ECDC and its subsidiary AIDC, whether it is the DTIC from a policy perspective, whether it is the state-owned enterprises like Transnet and Eskom, etc. And I think all of them have serious and well-meaning initiatives to support what is recognized as one of the key sectors. I am, however, concerned about the alignment between all of them. And the alignment between them sometimes does leave questions, does create confusion, does perhaps dampen the interest to invest. There are examples, for example, is the export port going to be Port Elizabeth or will it be Kucha? Depending on who you talk to, you get different answers. Transnet has recently put out a bid for privatization of a slice of land next to the port of Port Elizabeth for the automotive industry. I understand that the response has not been that good, partly because there is a concern, a lack of confidence, that that will be the future port for automotive exports. So I do think that government agencies, government departments, government entities are well-meaning, but the coordination and the development of, I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but the development of a master plan that we can all stick to and have confidence and that can be of sufficient length to give confidence, I think is perhaps missing.
Yeah, while I agree with Paulo, I must admit, Guy, that I think it would be, for us, as a sector currently, it would be absolutely disingenuous to say that this province government is not committed to the automotive industry. I think if any government in South Africa today that is absolutely supportive, from the Premier himself, the Premier of this province has his heart in the right place. And he is an absolute supporter of the automotive industry. No matter how difficult the issues are we are grappling with, he gets his fingers in the jar so that we can be able to find solutions together and support the industry the best way we can. And I think also some of the MECs that he has appointed, obviously the former MEC, Lungisi Mvoko of Economic Development at the time, we know now that he has moved to finance exclusively, and the new MEC, MEC Peters, I think there is political support in this province. And I think from a NAMSA point of view, we are also very excited about the appointment of Minister Pakstau as the new minister at the DTIC. I think, in our initial engagements with him, in less than 100 days since he's been in office, we are very, very satisfied that he also has his finger on the pulse. And I think in many of his engagements thus far, since he became minister, many of those engagements have been with the automotive industry. As we speak today, he's launching, with Toyota at the Dube Trade Port, one of the local manufacturers that are setting up a shop in that particular Dube Trade Port. So I think we are certainly, very hopeful that we are at least heading towards the right direction. But I think the point that Paulo is making is an important one, that we need coordination. Because what the province, you can have all political support, but if the province is not talking to national, national is not talking to municipal, that coordination is obviously going to be lost in translation, not just only from policymakers, but also those who are charged with the responsibility of implementing the policy at SOE level. And that is the point that Paulo is making. very, very well. So I think that coordination is absolutely very sacrosanct.
Super. I think one last question to close off the session and directed to Michael and to Ndu around this issue of electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, hydrogen, all of these aspects. How are your members gearing up to take advantage of the opportunity that we all know is coming sooner rather than later? And what do you think that means for the province in terms of improved exports? So Ndu, I'll start with you.
Thank you, sir. I think partly I covered that bit of that misconception again of saying that from an EV perspective, we are far off as a sector. One, that policy stability, and I mean, for us is to operationalize the EVY paper and let's move on. And you then find OEMs to say, let them then, lead with the investments which are, or let's say the announcements for the changes. And as the component sector, we are ready to take that. I'll be easy and short on that answer, is that we are waiting, we are ready, and there hasn't been a case in any investment, in any investment announcement where component manufacturers have not reacted to that and supported. So I think that's that. We need that stability. We need to operationalize the EVY paper, and then for us, it's in the announcements must come, and I think we'll fully support as components.
Well, unlike Ndu, we are actually disappointed with the white paper because we believe very strongly that the white paper is narrow in its focus, because the focus of this white paper is even called the white paper on electric vehicles. And we know that you cannot choose one technology over a multiplicity of different technologies that we have. Currently, if you look at the South African investment story and investment pattern, Andreas produces a hybrid Mercedes-Benz C-Class from here in this town. Toyota is producing a hybrid Toyota Cross in Prospecton in Durban. BMW has announced a 4.2 billion investment to produce a plug-in hybrid for an X3 from Roslyn. Ford Motor Company also has made an additional 5 billion announcement to produce a vehicle from their plant in Silverton. But if you look at how the white paper is currently structured, it's really skewed towards electric vehicles. And we also know that our markets, our biggest markets in Europe, who initially indicated that they will be focusing mainly on electric vehicles, we know that many of those markets have actually softened those hardened positions. And when you look at, obviously, the approach, we are saying, let us focus not on zero-emission vehicles, which is what the white paper is talking to. We are saying we want, obviously, a multiplicity of drivetrains to include hydrogen, to include traditional hybrids, to also include plug-in hybrids, so that we can really be able to transition. Because in order for us to be able to have an adoption that is compelling, currently a lot of South Africans are still very nervous to go straight into a BEV vehicle. Because the transition, and to convince people to say you can get rid of your ICE engine and go into this battery electric vehicle to drive from Musina to Cape Town, is going to be a nightmare for many people. So we believe very strongly that you need still the pleasure to be able to have your ICE engine and also a battery electric vehicle, so that we can really be able to transition in a smoother way as opposed to a stop-start approach. And we are obviously going to be engaging the new minister so that we can be able to see how we can work together to tweak this white paper to enable us to include the excluded drivetrains that are absolutely key for us to transition smoothly into this transition. Thank you.
Yeah, and building on what Mike was saying, we've been building hybrids since 2016. Now we can look at our calendar, it's 8 years. So there is absolutely no excuse not to have an electric car in Africa or in South Africa, keeping in mind that we are exporting to 80 countries. So the South African customer signs the contract to buy a Mercedes as much as the other 79. And that, and I can only underline what Mike was saying, that makes the portfolio of drivetrains that we have to have on hand, that makes the complexity. So it will not be only combustion engine, it will not only be battery driven, there will be hybrid and a lot of other attractive elements that moves your car forward. But we have to have a double strategy. We have to be, as a sector, standing close to each other to have an influence on the, let's say, the policy framework. And on the other side, we must stay flexible in our customer demand. And we have to stand on both legs. One without the other is completely useless. So we have to take that extra load, extra burden to do both things at a time. And I'm coming back to my sports analogy, that makes the team strong. Because if every player on the field knows what he or she is doing, then we are a Champions League team. Currently, I'm agreeing with you, that we may need a little bit of training to be that successful. And I'm agreeing with you guys, the potential is there, but the potential without winning the game is only halfway. So let's get our ducks in a row, get the teams behind the wheel, and let's get going. And no excuses, just action.
Yes. It's not the unfortunately, that's not the purpose of the session, but I'm going to ask I'm going to ask the panelists if they would be willing to take some questions from the floor. Where's my brown envelope? All right, so you've got a burning question.
Yes. Good afternoon, distinguished guests. Nice to meet you, Michael. We spoke several times over the phone for the last 5 years. My name is Gino Dalfava Andreas and Paolo. Gino Dalfava, I'm a local entrepreneur in the maritime and shipping business for the past 50 years. The sector is untransformed, and Andreas, you would know that you have a number 1 or 2, 3 service providers who are global competitors. So small black businesses like us don't get an opportunity in your value chain. We put on a bid, number of years, we submit, and then it goes to the big players, Bidvest and DHL and DSV, all these German multinationals. We black players don't get an opportunity. So Michael knows me, we've had that discussion, we've presented to NACAM, to NAMSA, and even Toyota of getting black suppliers. Please, Andreas, if you consider, we've been speaking to your supply chain people on integrated transport, and we're not getting those opportunities of non-essential components that go to the production line, if it's air freight or sea freight. Thank you very much.
There we go. Any other questions? Gino, thank you very much. Would you like to respond, Andreas?
Was that a question or an encouraging comment? I think it's both. I think it's both. I hear you, sir. Let me start by saying we take the enterprise development very seriously as a company, very seriously. I think we spent over 50 million rand last year in that space. Not only to get the tender in a space where you can compete, also giving you the success of the tender process and also develop enterprises. So I want to keep that to put things into perspective. Number two, there are certain global contracts because of the pure scale of global transport that is so centrally. That's not an excuse not to do the other, don't get me wrong. But we are, on one side, acting responsibly in South Africa as an enterprise development initiative or initiatives. But on the other side, we are dependent on economy of scale when it comes to global transport. So please excuse me being that vague, but that's the blunt reality. Some contracts are awarded purely because of the scale, and it's not a South African contract, it's global transport, and it's awarded like that.
Gino, yeah. Yeah, good to see you, Gino, and I'm hoping we can have another follow-up conversations. And the point you're raising is an important one, because transformation in this sector has been a challenge for the longest time. And we needed to find ways that are meaningful that will help us to drive our transformation agenda in a very aggressive way. And I think as much as the points that you've raised have been well received, and I think we need to be able to find a way to address them, I think as a sector, we've come also a long way. If you look at where we've been in the last 5 years as an industry, when I came to NAMSA 5 years ago, many of our OEMs were barely even getting to a level 6, for an example, in terms of their BEE, credentials. Today, as I'm sitting here today, we have 1 level 1, we've got 3 level 2s, and we've got 3 level 3s. So we've come a long way to really get our OEMs to transform and to make a concerted effort to bring in black suppliers into their value chains so that we can really be able to make sure that we're able to drive this transformation agenda. We didn't stop there, Gino. What we also said was that we needed to create a platform and also a vehicle that is going to help us to drive our transformation agenda. We've created what we call the Automotive Industry Transformation Fund, where all the 7 OEMs are contributing, at least for the next 10 years, an amount of 6 billion rands. So that a company like you, when Andreas, for an example, is not able to take your contract, you need to be able to push and say, but where am I lacking? What are the things that I'm not having that can help me to be able to get to those global standards? And then through the AITF, we're able to then provide that additional support that can be able to position our black-owned companies in the country. And I think Andreas is right. I think we are doing everything we can, and we also accept the fact that there are global contracts that unfortunately many of our OEMs cannot get away from, but certainly we are pushing quite very hard to be able to make sure that we are able to bring as many of our local companies into the automotive industry as quickly as possible. Thank you.
I think I'm going to take it off. I'm going to take it not off the record, but I'm going to take it outside of this discussion. That's a one-on-one, unfortunately. Okay. What I would like to say, and Gino, Chettingu, maybe you and I must have a discussion as well, because it's about local development for international competition. That's what it's about. It's about getting local businesses up to speed so that they can compete with their global counterparts. And you heard Andreas talk about capacity, you heard him talk about quality, you heard him talk about on time. They can't afford to have a supplier that doesn't deliver on time or that doesn't deliver the value that they expect. So it becomes important. So, ladies and gentlemen, having said that, that concludes our panel discussion. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank our panelists very much for giving up their time, for contributing their expertise, their knowledge, and their insight into the export industry and the automotive sector in the Eastern Cape Province. I sincerely hope that the aspects that we've discussed here today will find expression. I have to go into the plenary session now and provide some feedback there as well. And I'm hoping that when we meet again, we'll be able to share even more success stories. We'll be able to report on the growth that we've achieved and the growth in the sector and the development of the suppliers and the OEMs in positioning the Eastern Cape as an automotive powerhouse, not only in South Africa, but on the African continent. So that concludes that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Big round of applause for our panelists. If I can ask, once you finish here, ladies and gents, if you can move into the plenary, there will be a feedback feedback session there. Thank you very much.
city on rock and roll. Say you don't know me or recognize my face. Say you don't care who goes to that kind of place. Knee deep in the hoopla, sinking in your fight. Too many runaways eating up the night. Marconi plays the mamba. Listen to the radio. Don't you remember? We built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. We built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. Built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. Someone's always playing corporation games. Who cares? They're always changing corporation names. We just wanna dance here, but someone stole the stage. They call us irresponsible, writers off the page. Marconi plays the mamba. Listen to the radio. Don't you remember? We built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. We built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. Built this city. We built this city on